The cabin was calm at 30,000 feet when the unthinkable happened. A stewardess leaned over a seat and snapped at a 14-year-old black boy who had been sitting quietly by the window. She accused him of being disruptive, her tone sharp and cruel, while the boy's wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. Passengers turned their heads, some whispering, others lowering their gaze, unwilling to step in. Then the stewardess shoved his shoulder, her voice rising, humiliating him in front of everyone. The boy clenched his hands tightly, trying not to cry. Imagine sitting on that plane, watching a child treated this way. What would you do if this happened right in front of you? Unknown to the stewardess, someone else on that flight had been watching in silence, someone she never should have provoked. The plane floated smoothly above the clouds, its cabin filled with the soft hum of engines and the occasional murmur of passengers. Families sat tucked into their seats, some children napping with headphones on, others flipping through magazines. Flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, their polite smiles masking the monotony of routine service. But in row 14, the air carried a different weight. A boy of 14 sat by the window, his backpack neatly tucked beneath his feet. His posture was careful, his movements quiet, as though he knew not to draw attention to himself. His eyes followed the clouds outside, trying to escape the uneasy stares he often met in public. Despite his politeness, his presence became a target. The stewardess assigned to this section was known among the crew for her sharp tongue and icy expression. She carried herself with an air of superiority, her words clipped and her patience thin. Authority for her was not service but control, and the boy became her mark. Each interaction dripped with disdain, her voice rising louder than necessary, drawing eyes from across the cabin. A few seats away, unnoticed by most, sat a man in a plain shirt and jeans, his calm presence blending into the crowd. He watched quietly, his eyes steady, his demeanor collected. Few recognized him at first glance, and fewer still noticed the way he studied the unfolding scene. It was Chuck Norris, sitting in silence, observing every detail, as though waiting for the moment he would be needed. The stewardess stopped at row 14 with a sharp turn of her head. Her voice cut through the calm of the cabin like a blade. She accused the boy of misbehavior, claiming he was being disruptive, though he had barely spoken a word since takeoff. Her tone was loud enough to make heads turn, her words laced with irritation as if she wanted the entire cabin to see him as a problem. The boy's eyes widened in shock. His voice trembled as he spoke softly, barely above a whisper. He explained he had done nothing wrong, that he was only sitting quietly watching the clouds. But his words did little to soften her harsh glare. She leaned closer, pointing a finger, her authority pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't escape. Passengers nearby exchanged uneasy glances. A couple whispered in hushed voices, clearly unsettled by the sight of a grown woman towering over a boy. But no one moved. Fear of confrontation kept them rooted to their seats, their silence a heavy burden in the air. The boy's small attempts to defend himself only seemed to fuel the stewardess's irritation. The tension in the cabin grew thick, every eye waiting to see how far she would push her authority. And in that silence, with the boy shrinking back into his seat, no one expected who was about to stand up for him. The stewardess's frustration boiled over. Her voice rose, sharp and commanding, accusing the boy of lying, of trying to act innocent. Without warning, she reached down and yanked his arm with a rough grip. The boy winced, his eyes wide with shock and pain. Before he could even react, her hand came across his face in a stinging slap that echoed in the cabin. The sound of the strike silenced every other noise on the plane. Gasps erupted from the rows around. A woman covered her mouth in horror. A man shook his head in disbelief. And within seconds, phones were raised, passengers recording every moment. The tension turned electric, outrage simmering in the air, but no one dared to rise from their seat. Fear of airline authority, fear of escalation pinned them down. The boy's cheeks flushed red, both from the sting and from the humiliation of being hit in front of strangers. His eyes glistened, not just with tears of pain but with the deep shame of being treated as less than human. He whispered again, voice cracking, insisting he hadn't done anything. The stewardess ignored his pleas, standing tall as if punishing him proved her power. Around them the cabin was divided. Some passengers muttered angrily under their breath. Some shook their heads. Others looked away, unable to face the cruelty unfolding just a few seats away. The cameras kept rolling, but no one moved to shield the boy. The power imbalance was glaring, the injustice unbearable, and still the silence stretched. But in the middle of that silence, one presence remained steady. Calm, watchful eyes tracked every movement, every word, every strike. Someone wasn't going to let this go any further. Chuck Norris did not flinch when the stewardess struck the boy. His gaze was steady, his jaw set, eyes locked on her with the kind of calm that carried more weight than anger ever could. Years of discipline had trained him never to act in haste, but his silence was far from indifference. Inside him was a lifetime of battles against injustice, moments where he had stood between the weak and the powerful. Moments where respect and dignity were the lines he never allowed anyone to cross. The cabin seemed to shrink as he shifted slightly, his presence drawing attention though he had not yet spoken a word. Passengers who had been glued to their phones now glanced toward him, sensing a change in the air. Slowly, deliberately, he placed his hands on the armrest and rose to his feet. The murmur in the cabin died instantly. The stewardess paused, caught off guard by the sudden movement. Even the boy, still clutching his stinging cheek, looked up through tearful eyes at the man now standing tall. There was something about him, something unmistakable. The audience of passengers, and those watching later on every phone recording, would soon realize exactly who had chosen this moment to intervene. Chuck's voice cut through the tense silence like a blade. Calm, steady, and unshaken, he said. That's enough. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made several passengers straighten in their seats. The stewardess turned, glaring at him with irritation rather than fear. And who exactly are you to tell me how to do my job? She shot back, her tone dripping with arrogance. She didn't recognize him, not yet. To her, he was just another passenger daring to challenge her authority. The boy looked between them, his chest still trembling from holding back tears, his hope flickering in the presence of someone finally standing up. Chuck didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word was measured, delivered with the quiet authority of a man who had faced greater threats than arrogance in a uniform. You laid a hand on a child. That ends now. The stewardess laughed under her breath, though there was a nervous edge creeping in. Sit down before I have security waiting for you when we land. She stepped closer, but it only highlighted the absurdity of her defiance. Passengers leaned forward, eyes wide, their anticipation electric. They weren't just waiting for a confrontation. They were waiting to see if this man would truly act. Chuck took one deliberate step forward, his presence filling the aisle, shifting the entire balance of power in the cabin. The stewardess faltered, her confidence slipping while whispers rippled through the rows. Someone finally murmured the name that would soon hang heavy over the entire plane. Wait, that's Chuck Norris. The stewardess froze as the whispers grew louder around her. At first she looked confused, then her eyes widened as recognition struck. The name spread through the cabin like wildfire, whispered in awe and disbelief. Chuck Norris. Passengers straightened in their seats, some gasping, others pulling out their phones with renewed urgency. It wasn't just a man confronting her. It was a legend standing in the aisle, the same man whose life had been dedicated to discipline, honor, and justice. The man who had trained warriors, inspired millions, and stood against injustice wherever it dared to show itself. The stewardess's arrogance slipped, her face paling as she realized what she had done in front of him. The boy, still clutching his arm where she had struck him, looked up with wide, hopeful eyes. He now had someone by his side who could not be ignored. Every passenger's loyalty shifted in an instant. The crowd, once hesitant and silent, was now completely on his side, their anger no longer restrained. All eyes burned into the stewardess, and for the first time since the flight began, she looked small, cornered, and utterly powerless. Chuck did not raise his fists, nor did he lash out with the strength everyone knew he possessed. Instead, his voice carried the weight of command, firm and unshakable. He locked eyes with the stewardess and told her in no uncertain terms that her actions were unacceptable, her abuse of authority shameful, and that accountability would come swiftly. His calm tone was more powerful than any blow could have been. The crew shifted nervously under his gaze, their arrogance evaporating as passengers around them erupted in applause and cheers. Phones recorded every word, every second, proof of what had taken place. The boy, still shaken, found comfort in Chuck's presence, his tears beginning to dry. The stewardess, once smug and untouchable, now stood humiliated, her face flushed with fear and regret. The crew members who had stood by silently were now shrinking back, caught in the storm of public judgment. Under the pressure of Chuck's authority and the overwhelming support of the crowd, they crumbled, powerless to defend their cruelty. The balance of power had shifted completely, and justice had begun its course. Not through violence, but through dignity, truth, and unshakable strength. The boy sat trembling in his seat, eyes still red from tears, until Chuck placed a steady hand on his shoulder. The simple gesture carried more strength than words, reassuring him that he was safe now. Passengers leaned forward, watching the moment with quiet respect. The pilot emerged from the cockpit, demanding answers, and after hearing what had happened, he announced that the stewardess and her supporting crew would face immediate consequences. What had started as humiliation for a child ended as humiliation for those who abused their authority. Chuck turned to the passengers, his voice low but carrying through the cabin. He reminded everyone that dignity, respect, and justice always stand taller than arrogance or cruelty. His words struck deeper than anger ever could, leaving the entire plane in reflective silence. The boy managed a small, grateful smile. His spirits slowly lifted, and as the crowd looked on, one question remained hanging in the air, gripping every viewer's heart. What would you have done if you witnessed this?